One of my defining memories as a child is a trip to London with my parents and my younger sister and going to Hamley's toy store in London. Now, when you were living at the time, as I was, in a small rural town in Zimbabwe, Hamley's 4-5 stories of acres and acres, miles and miles of toys like I'd never seen before was as extraordinary experience as I had ever had. And it is a touch point memory-wise for where I am today. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Norman Goodfellows, and welcome to the store in Fourways Crossing, which by my calculation is roughly the size of Belgium. You can walk for hours. I had to change my watch getting from one side of the store to the other, and very happily so, because it is filled with all manner of delights. Now, if you're watching this show not just as a wine drinker, but as a spirits fan, you've got a gin room, there's a tequila room, a rum room, more whiskey than the Scots would know what to do with. But for me in particular, it is the wine, and what they've done with the wine in this store is not just present it beautifully, but offer a marvelous cross-section of South African wine, but also wine from other parts of the world, including a real range of French champagne, and it's a fairly substantial one at that. There's also a room at the back which I am being taken to under strict security to go and have a look at. That is their high quality wine room that's got a selection of older vintages of big bottles and some of those French Bordeaux names that you look at and think, if only my bank manager liked me just a little more. So I'm going to go and explore all of those rooms, have a look at what's on offer here at a store that's got such an extraordinary selection of great South African wine, not just in terms of estates and winemakers, but also varietal and vintage, which makes a trip here one that takes somebody like me several hours indeed. So while I get my map ready and mark off where I need to go in this particular store, I'm going to take you back to the end of last year and the Investec South African Open played out at Blair Athol, where a gentleman named Louw and a golfer called Stacey got together, and we sampled some wine, had a look at the hospitality, and pretty much ignored the golf. One of my regular comments when I'm traveling and I'm celebrating South Africa is about two spaces where I feel as a country we really excel. One of them is in sport, and in particular golf, and the other is wine, where our bottles pop up in restaurants and stores all over the planet, and usually to great acclaim. Well, today we're bringing both of those together. This is the first day of the Investec South African Open at Blair Athol, where there is plenty of wine flowing over that way inside of the marquee as a number of top South African brands come together to celebrate what's a really important week on the golf calendar. So I'm going to watch a little bit of golf, but more importantly, I'm going to catch up with the wine brands here and then find out just how good for golfers wine might be. So if you would expect to find wine in and around a golf course during a big tournament like the Investec South African Open, you probably wouldn't expect to find this particular gentleman, certainly not from a quality of golf perspective, because as I've mentioned many times in our shared company, Louw Strydom, as lovely a guy as you are, as dear a friend as you may be, I can never forget the round of golf we played together at the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships. You were over doing some wine work then for Annie Else. We played Kings Barnes on the Sunday. I think you shot in the lower 140s, and at one point on a golf course in Scotland, we're technically almost in Wales.
Fond memories, Dan. Thanks for reminding me. You actually do me justice. I think it's 140 on the first night, not the back night. But yeah, you definitely won't find me around a golf course according to my quality of my golf. But I'm brought here today by a completely different reason, and one which I believe I'm slightly more adept at.
And it's one that is really exciting both for you, but I think also for the tournament, because I remark frequently, especially when I'm abroad and I'm talking to audiences that have South Africans in them, I always find that it is sport and it is wine that celebrates South Africa like nothing else. We tend to perform on the world stage, and of those sports, golf tends to lead the pack. So we're able to this week bring together a field that's got major winners like Charles Schwartzel, an incredible array of golfers, together with some world-class wine.
No, 100%. I think something that resonates from a South African perspective has always been our competitive edge, and we've shown that over and again according to our sports, especially with something like golf, as you just rightly mentioned, a couple of major winners right there. But one area where we also don't have to stand back from a competitive area is our wines. Our wines made in South Africa are going strength to strength in the last 15 years. And I mean, if you look at a wine like this right next to us at the moment, it's the Old Vine Reserve Chenin Blanc from Ken Forrester, which this year was awarded the best Chenin Blanc in the world. And that's just one accolade awarded to one winery in a multitude of wineries in South Africa, from bestsellers to both Jordan and Kanonkop in the beginning of the year, all the way through to, again, outstanding wines awarded from across every publication, every show that ranks or rates wines. South African wines are in the top 10, top 15 time and time again.
There's often a conversation about how South Africa delivers so much above its weight when it comes to golf, in that we have winners all around the world from this little country that doesn't have the resources of an America or the Western Europes or the South Koreas or the Japans, and yet we do deliver time and again. But what about the wine story? Because we're not as big as America, we don't have quite the history of France. There are so many other countries with bigger economies, more resources, and yet somehow South Africa manages to keep up with, and in many cases overtake, people who by rights should be well ahead of us.
I mean, 100%. I'll agree with you on all of those factors. Pot may be one where we say, we don't necessarily have the history of France. We're very fond of reminding people of the fact that South Africa has been making wine for over 350 years. And there are certain areas in Bordeaux and Burgundy, these famous regions in France, where they only started making wine 200 years ago. So in a way, we are actually the old new world, as they would refer to us. But in the modern day marketplace, South Africa has a lot to catch up on the rest of the world, and we are making inroads annually, as we just alluded to already. And I think it comes down to the fact that we've got this just ingrained kind of inherent characteristics of South Africans of being resilient and going out there and taking the challenge to the world. And so actually we aren't a third world nation when it comes to winemaking. We've got a lot of proud history to rely on, and we've got all the terroir in the world to focus and make terroir driven and specific wines. And every time we go out to the States or to the UK or wherever it might be, and we are leading the shows, people flock to our stands to see what we're doing. It's exciting, it's innovative, and it's definitely the future of winemaking is currently in South Africa.
The correction on history is welcome, and it's probably the wrong choice of word rather than the wrong interpretation, in that I think it's maybe that France has the greater status, yes, maybe in world wine, and that's the gap that we probably need to close most. Yeah. You guys have got, as AdVini, a group where you're working with some really strong brands like Kleine Zalze, like Lavenier, like Stellenbosch Vineyards, where you've got the ability to pool those resources. Do you see, not just with yourselves, but across the board in South Africa, that we are starting to close that gap, that we are starting to have people around the world see us in a not dissimilar light to the big French and Italian and Spanish and Californian wineries?
I think 100%. And I mean, you've just mentioned AdVini. And for those of you out there who don't really understand where AdVini fits into the picture, they're a French wine brand, for instance. They're almost, I hate to equate it to, but most accurately understood as a distill effect, effectively. However, the main difference being is that the brands and the properties they acquire, they encourage them to operate as they were. Don't change, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't fix what's not broken type thing. So having AdVini as a French stock exchange listed company coming to a place like South Africa, buying up some of the most reputable brands like Kleine Zalze, Ken Forrester, Lavenier, Louw, and Stellenbosch Vineyards, already alludes to the fact that they are fearful of us as a nation making quality wines, and we're starting to take market share from them, and they want to slice of that pie. So the best way to do it is come and buy South African wineries and take it to the world.
It's a lovely way of interpreting it. I must ask you a very important question, and that is, from an academic perspective, do you think that a few more of our professional golfers should be having the occasional glass of Chenin Blanc, and do you think it's going to help the golf?
Well, it certainly helps my golf. I can't speak for any of the other professional golfers out there. But what I would say is that I think a healthy appreciation for a glass of Chenin Blanc will go a long way to lightening a mood, either celebrating a great round or help commiserating somebody on a blowout back nine. So you definitely can't go wrong with a glass of Chenin in hand.
All right, well, that's very much the amateur golfer perspective. What about the professional perspective? Well, I can't ask the players who are in the Investec South African Open at the moment, but there is a player player who's not, because she's got her own tournaments coming up. Stacey Bregman is currently on ambassador duties, so I think she'd be the right person to ask a few questions about wine and golf. So if you're an amateur golfer, you've probably had a glass of wine after a round, maybe even a glass of wine during a round. 9 holes haven't gone so well. Perhaps a lightly wooded Chardonnay at halfway will lift your spirits and improve the game ever so slightly, or at least make you feel a little better. What about the professional golfers? Is that a little different? Well, let's find out from one of them, because Stacey Bregman is not just a professional golfer, but a fine professional golfer and a ladies European Tour player. I've seen you play golf and see you do it effortlessly and brilliantly. What about the wine though? Does that ever fit into a round of golf? Are you like the amateurs and finish off and have a couple of glasses when you're done?
Well, during tournaments, maybe I have maybe one at night, but definitely on a Sunday, I do after the event when you've played nicely. Yeah, I definitely treat myself to a nice glass of wine, definitely.
And easy to do in South Africa, where we are full of great wine. What about the rest of the world? Because you've travelled everywhere. Where are the cool places been to discover and drink wine?
I mean, we've had a tournament in Bordeaux in France, so that's a really good French.
You didn't go for the tournament, did you?
I actually played well there. I finished second that year, and we had a couple of celebrations with good glasses of wine. Even in Spain, you have all your Riojas. There's just so much. I mean, Europe has got so much culture. Italy, I mean, we spoil for choices also when we're overseas.
I find that a glass of wine can sometimes just smooth out the swing a little. What's the professional perspective?
I think it does. It definitely oils the joints, I think. There's nothing better than a good glass of wine. Also, it cleans the palate also, doesn't it?
And it's something you can also share with friends. For me, that's one of the great parts of wine. What about sharing it with golfers? When you are on tour, will you guys get together, end of a long day, maybe the South Africans on tour together and share a few glasses?
Definitely. Myself and Nicole Garcia have shared quite a few glasses of wine together and had some good laughs, and also the others with Cass and Dejan and all. So yeah, definitely, it's in our blood. I mean, we're South African, how could we not?
So the highlight of the Investec South African Open at the end of last year, the hospitality and more specifically the wine, thanks to Louw from the AdVini group. And well done Stacey Bregman, a new admission to the world of fine wine lovers in between playing some great golf, which she continues to do on both the Sunshine and Ladies European Tour. So some terrific wine there. How about the wine in this room? Now if I could, and I've checked the security, it's not feasible, but if I could, I would shove a crate or two up against the door, lock myself in and drink my way through as much as possible, because this room is filled with some absolutely astonishing wine. There is here stuff you cannot get. Ibn Sadi's Palladius, for instance, the Porcelainberg coming to you from all the way out in the Swartland. Wine that is just so difficult to get your hands on. The Sir Lawrence Graf from Delair Graf. It cost a fortune, but gee, it's a magnificent wine. Or maybe you want to go international. California, Opus 1, it's almost 10 grand a bottle, but it is one of the definitive New World wines of the modern era. Or maybe a bit of old school French, head back to 2007 and some Cheval Blanc, or maybe a Magnum of Chateau Palmer from 2004. What you have in this room is a testament to some of the great wine of not just South Africa, but all over the world. And yes, that stuff with a real name, a real vintage, a real heritage is going to cost you, but it's worth saving up for the occasional bottle where you really get to understand why some of this top name wine has got the reputation it does, but also, and I think this is so important, discover that some of our own South African wine, which tends to cost an awful lot less, still raids against these wines, rates really well, and can stand up to some of the biggest names in wine history. This is the room to do that particular experiment. Speaking of experiments, I had one of a sort as summer kicked into gear with the team from Spier. They invited me out to try and taste some organic wine. Now, organic wine for some people immediately, a little bell goes off, oh, it's organic, it's not going to taste so good, it's made by barefoot hippies who are dancing around at the moonlight and creating wine that's going to taste like sandals and lentils. And no, it's not the case. It's a really big part of of modern wine farming, and making your wine in concert with your terroir is increasingly important, not just to those making the wine, but those of us who are drinking it as well. So what have Spier done and how good is the wine? I dropped by to find out. So one of the challenges whenever we film with esteemed winemakers who've come up from the Cape is finding somewhere in Johannesburg that can match the beauty of Stellenbosch and surrounds. For once though, I think we might just have managed it. Johan, all the way up from Spier, it's not quite the rolling vineyards, but it's not a bad alternative, is it?
Oh, look at that, it's almost as green as Stellenbosch at the moment, maybe more purple here. But thanks for being here, and yeah, we're here to taste some wine and talk about the good things at Spier, I think.
And talk about a really important story, which is not a surprising one from Spier, because when I think of you guys, aside from racing cheetahs and the old days of going to Moyo and having my face attacked by Tipex and all the things that you guys do, there's always been a sense of innovation to Spier. You never rest on your considerable laurels, and you've taken a big step now into a space that's certainly not new, but I think is more important than ever, and that's the issue of sustainability in wine.
Yes, I mean, that's it's forever been a topic if you're a farmer. But I think today in a world where everyone is much more conscious about what's going on, it's now much more topical. So we have been on the sustainability journey for a while. And organic is one of the vessels, biodynamic, permaculture, agroforestry. But in the wine world, organic, I think, is much better understood. We must also add that organic has some ways to come because it's had some negative connotations to it. But as you've said, I mean, we have some laurels that we don't like to rest on. And when we decide on this path to go, we said we're not going to make an organic wine unless it's indiscernible from another wine on a tasting palate.
And that's so important because there are lots of people, it's kind of like the people who won't, under any circumstances, have a plant-based protein dish because it's not the real deal. Yeah. I think people had a similar kind of, well, if it's organic, it can't possibly be as good. And it's taken a while to dispel that myth.
It has indeed. And I mean, we must also be honest, in the past, I think when people started on this journey, some people thought neglect is also a way to be organic. And we've realized wine teaches you very hard lessons. You must be bloody, you must keep your head low. So if you don't look at the basics of wine, the wine will teach you a hard lesson. So I think that might have happened in the past with some winemakers or farmers, but we've made a decision, this is where we want to go. So we can't let those hard chemistry fool us. We have to look after it and give a presentable wine to the world, because we want to change the world by giving you something that's sustainably farmed, but also regenerative. It has to build. We cannot just go on the same track that we've been going on for, well, I'm not saying hundreds of years, but probably the last 40 years after the last big war. That's what's it, 80 years. But it's the last 40 years were pretty fast changing. So we have to change a bit again.
So for somebody like me, for whom biology was always a challenge at school, give me the very basic, what were you doing, what are you doing now?
All right, so typical farming would entail fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide, apart from growing, and that's just your insurance policy to have a crop. So with organic farming, you can use all those, but you're not allowed to use synthetic ones. So fertilizer must come from compost or natural manure. Pesticides, you can use pesticides, but it's not the chemical ones. You can use other pests to organize the pests, right? So we have these bugs that attacks the mealybug and the like that we don't want, which we would have previously have controlled with chemicals. And then the other thing is obviously taking care of the foliage of the vineyard. So you would use a fungicide for that. But in organic farming, you can still use that, but not a synthetic one. And it's also based on the contact. So it protects the leaf for a short period of time. And then there's no residues at all in any of the wines. So that's the major differences. But the big gain in it, I think, is the fact that you're softer on nature. There's less residue in the soil as well, which is important.
Last question for you as the farmer before we jump into the winemaking side of it. How much more difficult does it make, if at all, this wine to produce?
Right, so it depends on the weather, obviously, because that's the major contributing factor to risk and to disease pressure. So in a sort of a mild summer, there's no real problem. But if you've got weather like we have here today, that's a little bit humid, it's good heat, but this is favorable conditions for fungus to grow. So depending on the disease pressure, it becomes, you have to spray a bit more often. So it's one of those things where you think it's really doing everything good, but there's a lot of challenges around it financially, typically. So you will pass a couple of more times through the vineyard. You'll have to pass with people through the vineyard a bit more often to aerate the vines and the grapes. So it's actually slightly more expensive to grow organic, to be honest. And most people don't understand that. They want like for like. End of it.
The end result, though, has to be ultimately a wine that when I drink it, I say this is just as good or arguably even better.
Yeah.
So let's find out if that's actually the case. You've got a range of 4. This is the Good Nature Organic range.
Yeah.
It's nothing wildly surprising in terms of varietals. You've gone with a good solid quartet, a Sauvignon, a Chenin, and a Shiraz and a blend. Let's kick off with the Sauvignon Blanc.
Sure, 100.
So this is our first one. So it's organic wine, so I should be getting tasting notes of lentils and people who live in Woodstock and sandals, and
definitely.
That's what's coming through for me.
Big forest floor, obviously, some medicine, sage, brush. I think, Dan, to begin with, that's what we said. Wine that's indiscernible from another wine in a lineup. So then people will ask you, okay, so why is it organic? Why does it matter? It matters to us because it's not really just about the wine, it's about where the wine comes from. It comes from the soil, so we have to build on that, as I said before. So this is grapes from the Koekenhaap region, so it's way up the west coast. And the reason we're there is the disease pressure is a lot less there. It's obviously in the Makwaland, so it's dry. And this is pretty close to the ocean, so about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that 45-degree heat from Vredendal comes like 23, 24 degrees. So it's much more bearable.
Yeah.
And then it makes that region typically makes a style that's slightly nettly, slightly grassy. And the big, nice tropical flavors that's coming from the bottom, which will evolve as the wine it's been in the bottle for about 3 months, but it'll evolve a bit more. So nice, vibrant flavors. I think it's typical South African Sauvignon Blanc, maybe with a little bit of a New Zealand Thiel influence, but this is what I smell.
Well, cheers.
There's a touch of grapefruit on that, which is more reminiscent of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
And certainly no hippie notes to it. It's a glass. I think even somebody who just drinks wine very casually doesn't know too much about it, they pick it up and say, oh, this is a really nice glass of Sauvignon Blanc. And there's nothing that may go, oh, hang on, there's something a bit different about this, which I think means you've achieved one of your key objectives.
Exactly. So if you speak to people in the public, just like yesterday, the people said, why are you writing organic so big on the label? And obviously the person has got that negative connotivity to organic. And this is also a range which we would like to use as a vessel to change that mindset. And hopefully other people will follow suit.
Well, let's talk about that as we move on to the Chenin Blanc, which I'm rather looking forward to, because you guys have got a very strong record when it comes to Chenin Blanc. And that is the flip side to that coin. Yes, there are the people who, oh, no, it's organic, no, thank you. Increasingly, I look back to Cape Wine and conversations I had with a lot of the wine buyers coming in from Europe and from America. People want to know, where is your wine coming from? What's the weight of your glass? How are you making the wine? Those issues that we can broadly call green, those are now playing an active role in the wine that people are choosing to make, above and beyond just, well, it's rather nice and I like the price.
Exactly, and this is the whole sustainability story. Started maybe 15 years ago as a movement, and back then it was all about green, and a lot of people, I think, became greenwashers to the point where you can have an organic wine, but it's in a heavyweight bottle type of thing. So there's a bit of a misfit sometimes, but it's a work in progress. Even us at Spier recognize the fact that we're not perfect. We're on this journey, and this is what we like people to plug into, to tap into, to realize that we are going somewhere that we think is positive, and come with us on this journey if you wish. If you don't want, we still have the other wines that you can take to glass. And but I think the long-term strategy for us is to be sustainable farmers. But sustainability means 3 things, not just green. It means people, it means finance. So we're very, very aware of all those elements, and we're building greatly on that. And we want to be industry leaders. We want to be responsible people in the market that people can look up to and see, yeah, you know what, they tried this. Maybe they got 3 more years to go before they make a success, but at least they put their neck out and go for it. So this is what we're doing.
All right, well, you've shown that you can do the white. Let's move on to the red and see if organic hits the right notes there as well. And I'm interested in your choices here, because there's a whole range of wine you would have gone for. And normally when we think of what headlines the Stellenbosch story, we go with Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah.
What you've gone for is a Shiraz and a Shiraz blend.
Yeah.
Why those choices?
I think because these wines aren't really that old, it's 2021 vintage. So something smoother, something softer, that's got enough depth. So Shiraz typically projects something more smooth and soft, but it's got the depth of Cabernet Sauvignon without the real dryness of tannin at the back of the palate. But it's almost like you're pleasing a Merlot drinker, but you're tickling the fancy of a cab drinker as well. And I think also from South Africa, Shiraz is a grape that sometimes gets neglected. You have so many other superstars, but Shiraz, I think, is right on the horizon of raising its head and looking over the mountain and say, here I am, take a look. It's the most planted red grape now in South Africa. Farmers sometimes have a longer view than winemakers, and they'll plant stuff that we don't want them to plant. So there's a lot of Shiraz now. And Shiraz, I think, is the next Merlot. It's smooth, it's soft, it's round, it's rich. It's complex, depending on the style that you make of it. This is fruit that we also get from a little bit further north. It comes from the Olifants River basin. And the reason why we get fruit from that far away, the disease pressure is a lot lower there. And add to the fact that we're replanting our farm in Paarl, which is a 100-hectare property of organic grapes. There's
100 hectares.
There's a lot of Shiraz on there, so we have to. But it's now 24 years old, so we're replanting, and the future for that farm is more Rhone varietals. So to kick off a range with something that we won't have in 3 years, I think that's a bit short-sighted. So maybe it's a long answer, but that's why it's Shiraz and Shiraz Cab.
And I see, and just from tasting, you pick up the style immediately. We're seeing a lot of the Syrah interpretation of the kind of slightly more elegant to complement the style that's been more of a South African trademark over the years. And this speaks a little bit more to that Shiraz style. It's a simplified way of putting it. All right, one more wine to have a look at.
Yep.
Is it the same Shiraz that sits in the blend?
The base of it is the same Shiraz, and then the cab is from the Paarl property only. So the cab from Paarl, obviously more like New World style, very opulent. So in this vineyard, we're able to to manage the tannin down with the way that we farm it, a little bit more open, so the bunches are more exposed to sunlight. So if you go to Stellenbosch, we'll typically try to protect them so we can have a longer ripening period. In Paarl, climate and heat doesn't really allow you long ripening, so you have to manage the canopy quite well. So if there was something lacking in the first wine, which I don't think there is, but very often people will drink a Shiraz and they think, it's maybe a bit simple. The Aussies, bless their souls, have shown us that Cabernet Sauvignon can be a good partner to Shiraz as well. So it's not really inspired by them. It's a little bit inspired by...
It's improved upon them.
Yes. But it's inspired by our property again, our terroir in Paarl, where we have Shiraz base, and then there's the cab that we can have there for a little bit more backbone and a bit more length. And that was the idea behind this blend.
You're off to a committed start and a strong start. I am going to hold you to this, though. I'm going to keep a close eye on how things envelop. I look forward to tasting a lot more of the wine, seeing how this story unfolds, and see how it forms part of not just the Spier story, but the greater South African wine story, because I think it's going to be yet another one of our really strong calling cards to get the rest of the world drinking, appreciating, and buying in large volumes South African wine.
I mean, it's a beautiful place, as you can see, and everyone knows that, South Africa. The people are beautiful, they're amazing. We sometimes get the behind teeth when we go into the market for our wines, but this is just one of those elements that really shows the world that we're super versatile, we're super committed, we're not going to hang around and disappear tomorrow. And I think that's one of the proud moments of South African wine, is that you can bank on it. It's solid, it's in good hands, and there's other companies as well that pushes this agenda very hard. So to responsibility and sustainability, I think, Dan.
Indeed. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you. Cheers. Yes, Cape Town, that really was Johannesburg. We're not all just barbed wire and mine dumps and potholes and broken traffic lights. That might be most of us, but it's not all of Johannesburg. And you do get stretches like that where we get to celebrate days like the one we had with Spier, where a really important step is being taken, not just by Spier, but by so many of our wine producers who understand the importance of making wine in concert with terroir, in concert with nature, ensuring that wine becomes part of a brighter, cleaner, better, greener future for us all. And more consumers are looking for that when they're buying wine. Yes, we want good quality wine, we want it at good value, but we also want to know that the backstory is one that is helping, supporting, improving the environment, and the Spier story is a lovely illustration of exactly that. It's cause for celebration, which puts me in a rather good part of Norman Goodfellows here at Four Ways Crossing, because this is the champagne room, and it's full of a lot of names you'll recognize, from Moutet Chandon and Veuve to Laurent Perrier. There are also some names that are perhaps not quite so familiar. If you do know your champagne, you'll be aware of people like Lallier, for instance, or de Venage. There's some Belle Epoque or Blanc de Blanc at a frightening amount of money, but that's because it is so rare and so sought after. And what this room does is tell me two particular things. One, the love of champagne, but also the opportunity that arises for our Cup Classique, which sits just that way, also in really impressive volumes. Now, if you come in here, there's a sign that tells you it's only 2 bottles of Moutet Chandon or Veuve Clicquot per person, and across not just South Africa but around the world, champagne from the big houses is under pressure. There is not enough stock to satisfy growing demand for high quality French champagne, and that for me opens up a gap, because so much of our top Cup Classique can really go shoulder to shoulder with a lot of really good French champagne and come in at a price that is so much lower. So if you're watching this as a Cup Classique producer, take inspiration certainly from some champagne in this room that has been delivering for, in many cases, centuries, but also know that with a bit of a gap in the market, we are as a country making bubbles that could take that step up and start to fill some of that French champagne gap. And on that note, I'm off to do some more research in the rest of the store. Big thank you to the team at Forrester, AdVini and Investec for today, and also the guys at Spier. And best of luck with your organic challenge. I'll see you back again next week. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. Goodbye.